Welcome to this edition of Trading Bits and Bytes. I'm Susan Littlefield. Lots of things to look at. One of them, what's this driving factor that we're seeing in this market this week? Of course, we know we had a report on Monday, started the final quarter of this year, and it's a new month, all wrapped up into 1 week. China also set to start some more talks as well. So a lot of factors that we're going to take a look at is Jeff Peterson joining us with Heartland Farm Partners. Let's start out this week. It's been kind of a crazy week with so many different factors being tossed in.
It really has, but the nice part is at least we got off to a nice start in the beginning of the week with a surprise report that gave us a nice boost in the market, which we didn't necessarily think we were going to get a chance to see. But unfortunately, right over the top of that, Susan, we've got the fund positions, which we have to keep on track of. You know, they're short this market yet, so that kind of keeps some pressure on this market. They aren't quite convinced that this crop is getting smaller yet, and as a result, they just aren't ready to buy it yet. And then we continue to not see across the whole Corn Belt a lot of freezing conditions. There are definitely cold conditions across the northern plains and also western Nebraska, but there just hasn't been enough yet talk about smaller yields to add to our early week strength to really get this market going.
At what point are we going to really start to factor back in the weather and the lack of harvest that's underway?
Yeah, I think it's starting right now. There'll be more attention paid this week, especially as we come into Monday, and we've really had a week where across many of the areas we haven't made much progress at all. And we're going to continue to see the crops that are not advancing very much. And then there's going to be more talk about the crop report next week and the yield and what's going to go on there. So I think we're on the verge of seeing more discussion about the slowness of harvest pace.
We also know kind of looming in the background has been China, and we know that number 13 in the trade talks are set to start. Could we see some possible excitement? What are you hearing? You
know, so far coming into these trade talks, it's kind of some of the best conditions we've seen yet. China's been buying. We had some announcements here this morning. Over 78 million bushels of soybeans were purchased, and as a result of that, about 75% of that was going to China, which is good. And so I think there's some positive news there. The U.S., Trump decided to go ahead and delay putting on the additional tariffs till out on the 15th. But what we have to remember, though, is that we're still asking them to make some very big changes. And maybe I'm being too skeptical, Susan. I'm not honestly expecting too much out of these talks other than just kind of kicking the can down the road, unfortunately.
I think there's a lot of people in that same camp at this point.
I think there is. You know, I think we all want to be hopeful that that's going to mean some bigger bean purchases, but we also have to be realistic, because what we got to be prepared for here, if Trump follows through with any of his actions that he's done before, he usually takes a really tough stance right before we go into those talks. So don't be surprised we hear something about, oh, guess what, if we don't see these trade talks go even better than what we expect, we'll see even bigger tariffs on the 15th. But we'll have to wait and see.
That'll be a hashtag Twitter market mover, right?
That's exactly right.
So what is it going to take to get some strength into this market to continue into some positives?
Yeah, really what it's going to have to come from is the supply side. The demand side, whether we're talking about exports or ethanol, there isn't enough positive there. And in order for us to be able to get into the supply side, what we're really talking about there is acres and yield. And really, I think the acre numbers, unfortunately, I don't think we're going to see those come down a lot. It looks like the FSA certified numbers are kind of supporting those. But over on the yield side, maybe as we get into next week's report, that's a possibility. If we don't see anything there, then it's actually the combines in the field that are starting to hear numbers coming in. The early numbers that we hear right now, corn's off a little more than what people thought. Soybean yields are probably a little more disappointing than what people were hoping for, and also compared to last year. So I think we've got the kindling to start moving this thing that way.
Is there some marketing opportunities, though, for our producers?
You know, there really is, and especially if you happen to have a dryer or you've got some early corn, you know, there's some extremely good basis levels right now in a number of these processors. And with the wet conditions that we got, I would say that's going to continue to show up as some opportunities, and so that's a big opportunity. But if you're looking at the basis level and you're looking at post-harvest, you're getting out there in the November, December, January, February, there's some attractive levels out there, but just because of the amount of stocks we have out there, I wouldn't be setting those basis levels yet. I'd just be focusing on the nearby, grabbing some of those really good basis levels that you see nearby.
As I was going to ask you, are we going to see kind of a gradual increase in these bases as we see the numbers coming in, you know, from the field?
I think what we'll see is as we go forward, if the acres are not getting harvested like we'd expect, then we'll continue to move some of this strength in the basis forward.
Anything to do with this unsold corn and beans? A little bit more that we should be doing, or locking the bin?
Yeah, well, definitely. If you've got room on the farm, go ahead and make sure you tuck those bushels away, and don't take those to market. If you're taking bushels into town, then it really comes down to this, Susan. If you've got really cheap storage and there's not a minimum charge, I've just put it on storage. But if you've got a really good basis level and maybe not the basis or the storage opportunities that's more expensive, then what I would do is I'd go ahead and do a basis contract. But don't set the futures price.
All right, sounds good. That's been this week's edition. Thanks, Jeff. For Trading Bits and Bytes, I'm Susan Littlefield.